Hey there, folks. This is Screen Watching. My name's Dan Barrett, joined by Simon Foster.
Hey,
I
kids.
apologize up front for the urgency in my voice, but sometimes events take itself to the point where you need to open the passageways, you need to have the conversation, you need to air out the situation as it's happening. Seconds ago, Simon and I were involved in some pre-show planning. Yes, it
Yes.
loosely happens, and we were discussing a segment we've got coming up. It is about Jodie Foster and her best movies. Okay.
Yep.
Simon Foster dropped this pearl of a line, okay, when I suggested that all Jodie Foster conversations begin and end with Contact because it's easily her best film. And then
It's a
he
fine
dropped
film.
in this statement: it's a fine film except for the end of the movie. At which point I
Yeah.
got outraged, but the time countdown was happening for me to start recording, so I haven't had time to properly digest this. We can't proceed with the podcast. We're going to have to stop for a moment. Simon, I'm opening the floor to you. You've got 30
Wow.
seconds. Explain to me what is wrong with the end of the movie Contact, because I would dare suggest it's perfect.
Oh, boy, you put me on the spot. I remember seeing the film. I remember loving the film. I read the book a couple of times, actually, so I was very excited about the film. I thought the notion that, and spoiler alert if you haven't seen Contact, the notion that deep space is actually a place of memory and it's where her deep-seated memories of her father exist and that he is the one that carries the message to her. I thought that kind of kerfuffled a little bit. Now, I don't get me wrong. I love Contact, and I'm keen to see where our intermission plays out in praise of Jodie Foster. Our three favourite performances of her. Of hers. So, look, I'm willing to continue this discussion in the intermission, but for me, Contact is almost a perfect movie, not the perfect movie.
Look, I'm not going to waste time on this one just yet, Simon. I'm going to politely refrain. We will get to this later on. But just quietly, I quite enjoy the movie Contact. I think it's rather good. Sorry, there's a visual prop now for the people watching the video feed of this, and I do have the
Yeah,
book Contact, written by one
the
Carl
Alan Dean
Sagan.
Foster tie-in. Have you? I've got the original color. I'm actually looking around for my copy of Contact, which I know is here. Honey, can you bring me my copy of Contact? Yeah, Carl
I'd like to
Sagan.
note that this was not an adaptation of the movie. This is the original book, but with one of those fancy movie wraparound covers.
Nice, very
Anyway, I don't know
nice.
where we're
It's
heading
going
with
to be
this
a big
segment.
show, though.
Let's dive in. We've got some big things on the schedule for today. The shed, I believe that the kids call it. I'm going to
Shed
take a
is
look at
industry lingo.
if you're reading Variety. Hey, look, I'm going to talk about the new installment of a Jodie Foster related TV program. It's called True Detective Night Country.
Oh,
Simon is going to be
exciting! And
taking a look at the latest. Simon, stop talking. Simon's going to take a look at Nicolas Cage's latest. It's called Dream Scenario. We're also going to have some chats about Ted, the TV series spin-off from the very popular movie and its less than popular sequel. Simon's going to chat a bit about the Holdovers, which I can't imagine he'd have negative things to say because it's amazing.
here we go.
Criminal Record is a brand new show on the Apple TV, and Simon's going to discuss something named Nighthawks. Folks, this is a lot of program, and we can only get to it if we play the opening titles.
This is not like TV, only better.
Television! Teacher! Mother!
Secret lover.
What, that's it? That's your movie?
Well, I said that I had an idea for a movie.
Folks, this is Screen Watching. My name's Dan, joined by Simon. Simon, let's not dilly-dally talking about weather. Let's not find out like whether we're well or not. We're both well. It's the middle of summer in Australia. Of course it's bad. Of course it's hot. Of course we're sweating in all of the places. We don't need to worry about that. What I need to know from you, Simon, okay,
Yeah.
is have you had a good week of screen watching?
Well, it's interesting you ask because the week began with what is now considered one of the most dire opening monologues of any awards show and the final nail in what could be the death of the Golden Globes. So I felt for him. I couldn't watch it at the time live. It was such an excruciating experience to watch Joe Coy try to crack a few gags. I went back and watched it a couple of times since and did a bit of forensic work on it to see where he stumbled, to see where the wrong breath was taken, to see which jokes just weren't properly formed. It's been kind of fascinating to go over and see how bad it really was and how it collapsed in such a heap. But hey, those Golden Globes, I mean, as average as the rest of the show turned out to be, they didn't really have a chance after that opening monologue to be anything other than dire.
Yeah, look, the ratings generally were perfectly fine. They were an improvement on last year's really dire result, but still not really what the ratings once were. Obviously, when the show last aired was about 3 years ago in terms of like a regular Golden Globes, and TV market's changed quite a bit in those 3 years. So where it's currently sitting at with 9 million, that might be enough to convince CBS to give it another go next year. I doubt anyone else will bother making an effort for it. It's only 9 million viewers. You could probably do that with less effort and less just annoyance in your just week.
An NCIS repeat gets about that, doesn't it?
I mean, not quite that, but like there's certainly other things you could do as a programmer to try to generate something similar. I'm not sure there's a compelling case for the Golden Globes at this point.
The actual awards themselves were just like an average award show. There was a few good moments and a few dull moments and a few laughs and a few cringes. So, I mean, the actual handing out of the awards I didn't think was any better or worse than we've seen in the past. But
I think it is worse.
To make it,
well, no, it just is
a
like just a
spectacle. It was amateurish the way it was done. You could sense some feeling in the room for the winners, and when Lily Gladstone won, these were all significant moments. But there was such an air of no, the ship's already sailed. Where this one's a lost cause. It was a tough 3 hours. I watched all 3 hours of it.
Look, even Penske media publications were critical of the Golden Globes, which I thought was
totally butchered.
I thought that was kind of incredible. Yeah. Anyway, folks, we're not going to talk about the Golden Globes because they're garbage. Instead, we are going to dive right into a handful of reviews.
It stinks.
Simon, I feel that the big title of the week is the much anticipated return of True Detective. And so let's keep that as some sizzle and instead talk about a Nicolas Cage movie called Dream Scenario. Good trailer. I've heard middling comments.
Why does the zebra look the way it does?
So embarrassing.
Hey, focus.
Is this how it went?
No, it's different now.
Paul, you've been on my mind recently.
Yeah?
Because you keep popping up in my dreams. You don't do anything, you're just there.
So, this specific person, the remarkable nobody, I've also had that experience. Do you have a picture?
Nicolas Cage is doing one of his, well, I want to say serious films, but it's a comedy of sorts, a very smart film in which he plays a professor, a tenured professor who is very upset that he's not sort of given more notice in the world. He's a very obscure figure, kind of blends into the background. But when he starts appearing in people's dreams, not in any meaningful way, just sort of being there, walking through them or standing there watching the dream unfold, he takes on a certain celebrity. And what begins as a bit of wish fulfillment on his part, he gets to be famous just for doing nothing in people's dreams, suddenly takes a bad turn when his life starts to unravel, his marriage starts to fall apart, and the person that appears in everyone else's dreams is a nasty figure, is a horrible figure, starts doing terrible things to people in their dreams. So he becomes this social outcast. It's a film that I found fascinating because it really does deal with fame and celebrity and the modern definition of that and the price of that sort of Faustian bargain that you strike when you decide to become famous or accidentally become famous in Nicolas Cage's character's case. But it's actually a very sweet film about a man who in the very opening scenes of the film has everything that he wants. He's got the loving wife played by Julianne Nicholson. He's got two teenage daughters who treat him with a modicum of respect, which is maybe all you can hope for from teenage daughters. And he has a good position and an attentive class who sit in on his theories on bioevolution. But in wanting more and craving the shallowness of celebrity, he starts to stumble badly. And it really is the beginning of his end as a man and in all aspects of his life. So this is a cautionary tale about fame. Cage, he does that everyman thing. It's kind of similar to what he did in Adaptation here, this sort of that schlubby type of character who's kind of on the edge of being quite comical, but is actually very real, and he finds this really interesting way of telling this character story.
Obviously, we were talking about when you're an adaptation, one of the two characters he played in that film was a character like that.
Kaufman. Yeah, exactly right.
Because I mean,
and,
obviously,
right.
considering the nature of Donald Kaufman and his subsequent passing, it would just be, I guess, maybe offensive to suggest that the late great Donald Kaufman was portrayed in such a way when obviously he was not that man in real life.
Exactly right. So Cage is terrific in this. If you're he's, I don't think you can say ever, even in his bad films, and he's made a handful of bad films, he's never phoning it in. Nicolas Cage, he's always thoroughly engaged with his character, trying to do different things. I think it might have been Ethan Hawke or maybe Tim Robbins or one of his sort of peers said that. I think it was who's the guy from the Shore thing? John Cusack. I think John Cusack said, watching Nicolas Cage act is like jazz music. You never know which way it's going to go. It's all these different riffs coming out at the same time. He could take you anywhere. And there's a little bit of that in this, but there's also a very real person in Paul Matthews. So I got to say, I really love this film. It's very funny in parts, very dark in parts as well, but absolutely winning by the end. So I'd like to see him get an Oscar nomination out of this because he is doing some good work.
He will not get an Oscar nomination for this movie.
I hope he does.
He will not. This film is just not part of the conversation. And I find that a bit strange. It sort of seems like
the Golden Globes. And he's had some acclaim.
The Golden Globes have nothing to do with Oscar conversation. It's true.
So it looks at the awards season roster. I just hope he does because he's in the mix. It's probably not going to come down to the final 5 or 6 or whatever numbers there are, but it's an interesting performance from him and a very smart film as well.
Yeah, 5 to 6 actors. That is the mix. That's being in the mix. But anyway, look, this is a film where I saw the trailer for it without really knowing it, and I was immediately keen to go and see it. But then I had the opportunity to go and see it, and making the decision to leave my house to go something that just felt like it was just Nicolas Cage doing more meta stuff, which we've kind of seen him do before in a way which we know that he's going to play it earnestly, but in a sense from just the very sort of casting of him is a big wink to the camera. I just sat there and thought, I'm just going to sit down and watch more LA Law. I just didn't care enough. And that's my concern with this movie. But that's my concern with this movie. I just don't feel that it's really offering anything that is new enough when you have the greater complexity of having hired Nicolas Cage as your lead. In a way, I feel this movie might have been better served if they went for someone who hadn't done that kind of work before. If it was, say, like Mark Ruffalo or someone like that, I'd be very keen, and it wouldn't have even been a hesitation to go and see a movie with someone like that in the lead. But just Nicolas Cage, it just kind of feels as though he's just walked that meta tightrope just too often at this point.
Okay, no, if you're taking that from the trailer, then the trailer certainly hasn't done his job. I know what you're saying about casting someone different. Ruffalo would be too young for what this character has to pull off. But yes, I can see what you. Well, I mean, we're going to talk about the Holdovers next. Maybe Giamatti could have pulled off something like this, but yeah, no, this is any reservations you have because you think this is Cage going through the motions. I encourage anyone to just get out and see it because it's not that at all.
I mean, I don't think he's going through the motions. I don't think Nicolas Cage has ever gone through the motions. Okay, I think every time Nicolas Cage appears on screen, he is doing something which is singular to the moment and really bringing something unique to it. But there's just something about the fact that I have seen him do something with that same spirit of intent before. And to me, that doesn't make it a worthwhile trip out of the house. But look, if I see this on a streaming service, I'll absolutely be hitting play on it at some stage.
It is called Dream Scenario in limited release. I know some of the major chains have it in their cinemas, but it's not everywhere, so you may have to seek it out in release right now. What's up next, Dan Barrett, if that is your name?
It is not. What is up next? Julio... oh, gosh. Sorry, I was trying to think of a great name. What about Enrique Carroccio? Look, I'm going to talk about True Detective Night Country. It's a 4th season reboot. Well, it's an anthology series, but it's kind of a reboot of the production. Let's play a clip and we'll talk about what's going on here when we get back.
What happened in the last case you worked with tomorrow?
That was good. Until it wasn't.
never too late.
Simon, cast your mind back to, we'll say 2014, but I think my story actually takes place in 2013. Actually, that's true because True Detective launched in January 2014. The experience that many of us had with that TV show started a few months prior. So this is back in 2013 when HBO launched the promotions for True Detective, and you had those amazing black and white photos of series stars Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey. They're looking very sharp in their suits, and we didn't know exactly what this program was. We didn't know, well, just anything about it. Then the show started, and week by week, people were talking because people could not wrap their minds around exactly what this program was. This is the show that introduced a lot of mystery box elements to it. Is there something supernatural happening? Is it actually a pretty straight cop thriller? You couldn't really quite tell, and the mood was playful while still being incredibly dour, while still playing it very narrow and very earnestly. It was deeply compelling television that had me hooked in from episode 1 right through to the final 8th episode. And not only was the show itself just damn watchable, okay, but also like just every element of it, from that original promotion campaign through to the opening titles, the theme song, all of it felt just incredibly fresh and vibrant. And even though it wasn't really doing anything entirely new, it still felt so fresh and new and spoke to that moment of premium TV that we kind of found ourselves in. This is a show that probably could have been accused of being difficult man-related prestige programming, which, if you remember 2013-14, conversation at that point was about needing to shift premium TV away from being so much about that. This was very much a post-Sopranos, post-The Wire, post-Mad Men, post-The Shield TV program. But these were still difficult men. These are still problematic sort of lead characters. Season 2 came along and they just kind of tried to replicate the same, but it was never really quite as good. They played with the structure a little bit more, and it just never really hit the mark.
Who was the stars of that one?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that because I was just trying to remember.
I was trying to think myself. When was the Mahershala Ali one? That was
season 3. But what you need to understand, Simon, is if I'm glossing over something, it's because I don't know the answer myself, and if I did, I probably would have mentioned it.
By now. Yeah.
Yeah, look. So season 2 of the show, and I'm trying to cheat right now in doing it.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. It'll come to us.
Taylor Kitsch was in there. Colin Farrell and Rachel McAdams and Vince Vaughn. So again, really good cast.
Got it.
Okay, and they shifted it from being 2 cops to 3 cops. And my only real memory of that program was that I remember reviewing the first maybe 3 episodes of it, and it wasn't particularly holding me. I then ended up posting some reviews around the place. I think on my former website, Televised Revolution, I ran a review there, and it wasn't positive. It was not a glowing review. Everyone who had watched that first season, as I had, were just outraged that I could dare suggest something negative about True Detective, at which point, I think I'd watched maybe the first 2 episodes. Someone's like, oh, how many episodes have you watched? And I'm like, oh, I'll watch the first 2 episodes. And then they're like going, oh, well, you can't review a TV program based on 2 episodes. And I'm thinking, well, like, when is the appropriate number of episodes to be able to review a TV program? Sorry, this has been a bugbear now for like 8 years. When is the appropriate number of episodes to review it? Like, am I allowed to review the TV show Cheers until all 231 episodes have aired? Like, at what point is that permissible? But that swings around. All of that comes into focus with this new season, where the second season hadn't been received that well, and then other critics posted their reviews. They were equally dismissive. Audiences watched that; they were dismissive. The third season came along, and that was a bit of like a Hail Mary. They were really hoping they could recapture the enthusiasm that first season had, and it was released to maybe sort of middling interest. As a result of the fact that the following 2 seasons hadn't really played out so well, Nick Pizzolatto, who's the guy that had written every episode of the program, or at least co-written every episode of it, he was more or less shown the door. He's got his name on the new series, but he's not involved. The new series is an entire creative reboot. Yeah, it's an entire creative reboot. Okay, but McConaughey and Harrison have gone after the first season, so that's irrelevant, Simon. I don't know why you even bring it up for. Okay, so as with every season, brand new crime, brand new location, brand new cast. And with this one, brand new creative team behind the scenes. So who do we have here for season 4? We've got a young ingenue named Jodie Foster. And look, let me just say, when I found out Jodie Foster was going to be starring in True Detective, first I had to go and collect my hat, which was blown right off. And then after that, I was just complete putty for this. The idea of Jodie Foster on board doing a regular TV program, hugely exciting. The fact it was a True Detective program for HBO, like, you know, come on. Like, how does one even process this?
Yep.
Start layering in some of the other cast here. You've got great character actors like Fiona Shaw and Christopher Eccleston are in there. You got Carly Reese, who's the co-star of this. I don't really know her from anything else, so it's been a real fun discovery. Just like seeing her in this. The internet tells me that she's a former world champion in 2 weight classes, so I guess that's boxing. Sure. She's anyway got like a really sort of interesting in that she's like a muscular woman physique. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But then some other actors as well. John Hawkes is in here, and he is fantastic in this. I'm like, John Hawkes is always amazing. It seems redundant to say John Hawkes is fantastic in something, but he just is, and he's here playing a fairly scuzzy police officer. What's really interesting about this season is that True Detective up until now has been very dude heavy. Okay, there's been a lot of interrogation as to what it means to be a male protagonist for a cop drama. And even though there have been female leads within the series up till now, so I mean Rachel McAdams, the aforementioned Rachel McAdams, she was there in the 2nd season, but even so, it was still Colin Farrell, it was still Taylor Kitsch, it was very much an exploration of them and what it meant to have them leading the TV programs. Here, it is flipped entirely to be a very female-centric drama. Now, I'm going to talk about that aspect of it a little bit more later in the show when I'm reviewing the new Apple TV Plus program that I've forgotten the name of, but I'll be talking about in just a few moments.
Criminal Record.
What's it called? Criminal Record. Very dull name. And both of them have a very similar thing that they want to interrogate, talking about female cops. Okay, but I think the True Detective show does it so much better, and we'll get to Criminal Record in just a short bit. But what's really interesting about this, you got Jodie Foster, who is the mother of a teenage girl who, the introduction to the teenage girl is a very pissed off Jodie Foster character having to pick up her daughter after there'd been an incident where her daughter had been there'd been some illicit photographs taken and discovered. Her daughter is a few years older than the other girl in the photos, and so that creates some tension. And so she's pissed off, and then there's like a drunk driver nearby, and so Jodie Foster takes all of her pissed offness and just starts sort of laying into this other woman who is being a danger on the roads. But you just sort of see like the way that the show is considering women and what they need to be able to do in order to be successful working as police while also dealing with a lot of the other issues sort of within their lives. It's just so under the surface text that I just thought this was magnificent to watch. There are so many dramas right now, Criminal Record, okay, where it just becomes text. Okay, it's absolutely under the surface. It's telling us amazing crime story, but it's not treating us like simpletons that haven't actually experienced these sorts of texts en masse for like the last 10 years. Instead, this is just a really smart, really savvy approach to it. And so you've got the Jodie Foster, sorry, Simon, I see you raising your hand, but just give me one sec. You've got Jodie Foster going through this, but then you've just got this other younger cop who is the aforementioned Carly Reese. She's approaching it from a different perspective in that she's also a woman who's dealing with some of the other same professional and personal hurdles that the Jodie Foster character has clearly gone through. But she's a young woman of the modern moment. Also, she seems like she's just a stronger physical and psychologically strong person at its core as well. It's going to be interesting to see both characters coming at it from different life perspectives, different ages generationally, and see where that takes us through this season. As the opening 2 episodes for this, I just think it's a very exciting spread that they've laid out for us, and I'm very excited to see where it takes us over the course of the season.
Totally on board with everything you say. The thing I find most interesting about Jodie Foster's performance is that we're used to her being playing a character who, for all her flaws, is kind of in charge. She can kind of roll with the punches, and she can sort of survive any situation. I loved watching this character with the notion in my head that maybe this is Clarice Starling after her career went off track for some reason. Maybe she didn't reach the fullest potential of herself. She's been sent to this Alaskan outpost. She finds herself in the middle of oil versus indigenous people's problems, and is trying to balance that while trying to balance a gay indigenous stepdaughter as well. I've found to see Jodie Foster kind of twitch and anger and try to keep cool while not always keeping cool. This was one of her most affecting and most real person performances that I've seen in a long time, and I just fell in love with her all over again in this role.
See, I really see this character not quite differently, but, certainly differently than you do here. You're seeing her just as someone who could be like a Clarice Starling who's ended up here. I read this character, everything about her says this is a woman that has been a cop in this place. And even if not a cop, she's certainly been part of the community, part of the very chilly, is it technically Alaska that we're in?
Yeah, I think it is.
I just assumed it was Alaska, but I just don't know if I read in something just immediately and
they're AFP, Alaskan Federal Police, or APF, Alaskan Police Force.
Yeah, no, it is Alaska. I could remember the town, which is like Elise or something. Ennis, yeah.
Ennis, Alaska, yeah.
But so Alaska, but this is just a very harsh landscape to be within. And to me, like, this is a woman who, and Jodie Foster in this is made up so that you're seeing like her. I mean, Jodie Foster's an incredible looking lady, okay, but even with that, like, they've really sort of gone light on the makeup, if not maybe just enhanced her age. Like, you really are seeing her for what a woman of this age probably would be. A glamorous version, but, still. What is probably worth mentioning is just the plot of this one, because that's pretty important. With any true detective, the actual plot of it isn't as important as seeing the stars go through some sort of a embodiment of character. That is kind of what drives these programs. But the plot is still very much what's going to have you there week to week. This one has in the same way the first season really lends into is this possibly supernatural? This really leans into that as a possibility. It starts out with the scene that we've seen in many things before, whether that's The Thing, whether that's the Thing ripoff from the X-Files Ice, or one of the many other TV movies that have kind of had the exact same conceit. We've got a research station in Alaska, very dude-heavy environment where something goes wrong and then, one of them turns and murders the rest of them or whatever. In this, you see there's an incident. Yeah, you see there's an incident in the very opening sequence of it with a great scene cameo from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. There is nothing goes wrong when you've got a clip from Ferris Bueller's Day Off playing in the background of a scene.
Great way to start any show, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So something takes place by the time that Jodie Foster and the rest of the crew turn up to investigate. Everyone's gone missing. It's been 48 hours at least. There's a tongue on the ground. I'm not going to say who it belongs to, but certainly there is a mystery at hand. And you as a viewer, because you've experienced movies and TV shows before, you assume there's a supernatural element to it. We know that there's a character who is seeing a ghostly apparition who, by the end of the first episode, has led us to where the bodies of at least a couple of the people from the research station have ended up.
Yeah.
There's certainly something at play, but is this a supernatural story? Who knows? Stick around full season, folks.
I guess that's the legacy of the first season of True Detective, that supernatural, was it the Yellow Cave or something that was in that first series?
Yeah.
And that cast a long shadow that goes all the way to season 4, and it's great to have that element to it. Now, I'm sensing from what you're saying you haven't gone through all the episodes yet.
No, I've very purposefully stuck with just the first 2 episodes because I want to see how this is going to play out, and I actually kind of want to be part of the conversation as it happens.
All right, I blasted through them. We did the whole thing in sort of 3 nights. So yeah, it holds up right to the end. It's a terrific piece of television, and I think it's going to be spoken of very highly when next year's. It'll be remembered right through till this time next year when the awards are being handed out on so many levels. It's a terrific bit of television.
Yeah, look, absolutely. The other thing just to note is that the creative behind this, it's a lady named Issa Lopez. I don't actually really know her that much. I don't think I didn't
see the name before either.
Yeah.
She's got a huge fit. She directs all the episodes. She co-writes a lot of the episodes. She's an amazing talent, and to pull off something like this without her coming with a big track record is a major achievement.
Oh, look, it isn't like she doesn't have a track record. I mean, she's been working as a credited writer since the early 90s, so she's certainly been around. It's just that she's primarily been working in Mexico, and I guess just not really a lot of, broader awareness of her work. But if you look at the work she's got coming up, it seems as though there's a lot of American stuff coming. So she's clearly been making a career transition and is and actually I don't even want to speculate on that. I don't really quite know enough about her, but I do know that from this, I want to know a lot more. Like, she is very much in control of this program, and it's incredibly exciting.
True Detective is dropping on HBO in the US and Binge here in Oz January 14, if I remember correctly. Am I got the right one
so
there?
it's Sunday nights in the US, as all the HBO dramas tend to roll out, and then Monday afternoon we'll see them here in Australia.
Which leads us into In Praise of Jodie Foster, our intermission segment.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's intermission time.
Dan Barrett, I thought, given she is one of the preeminent actresses of our generations, we should have a look at our favourite performances and favourite films of the wonderful Jodie Foster. In Praise of Jodie Foster, we're calling this segment. She has a commanding presence, as we've just mentioned, in True Detective Night Country. She's more beautiful than ever at 61, as we've already mentioned, has been in front of the camera for over half a century, started as a child actor. According to IMDb, she's got 82 screen credits from which to pick our favourite Jodie Foster performances. We'll narrow it down to 3. We'll probably mention some others. Why don't you kick us off with your first of 3?
So, my experience with Jodie Foster is very much a product of my age. So if you think about some of her most iconic titles, things like The Accused, things like Silence of the Lambs, I was just too young to really actively engage with them when they came out. So I was 11 years old when Lambs came out. I was 8 years old when The Accused aired. So when I think about her, it's very much as a contemporary actor, I'm seeing her in films which are probably not necessarily those that are considered to be her iconic roles. Probably one of the most iconic is having appeared in Contact. That's probably the biggest title from me being a grown-up adult. Because I don't want to say that she's had a decline in career, because I don't think that's really strictly true. But I think she's just had one of these interesting careers where she started out she's been working as a child actor. Okay, from the very late 60s, 69, 70.
One of her first roles, but prior to that, I think it was back into the early 60s, she was in some really young stuff.
1969, according to IMDb, in an episode of The Doris Day Show. Yeah, so if people... So if people saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the young actress who Leonardo DiCaprio has the very extended chat with, that is based on Jodie Foster. That is a Jodie Foster analog character. So that's been her. And so as she sort of, I guess, came of maturity being an adult woman, that's really where a lot of her biggest titles, and probably on that day where she passes, the New York Times is going to look back on titles probably from that sort of early to mid 80s through to the early mid 90s will be the peak of Jodie Foster. Where I came down was probably the sort of slide from prominence, but also I think slightly deliberate. I think this is her retreating and just trying to enjoy life a bit more.
Yeah.
So certainly some great films in there. So for me, it's things like Contact, it's things like Panic Room, Flight Plan, Inside Man. What was that movie with George Clooney a little while ago? Was she in that? No, I'm confusing actors entirely. She wasn't in that at all. Has she even been with Clooney on screen? I'm concerned she hasn't. I'm concerned she's done a lot of work with Mel Gibson and not with George Clooney. This just doesn't seem right.
It was of a certain time, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So look, when I think about my favorite roles, I'm just going to blatantly say Contact, but then
Let's go
beyond
with
that,
Contact as your first one.
I'm going to
we'll go back and
when it
forth.
comes to my second one, just be warned, I'm not going to give a title for my second and third one, and I'm going to build on what I was saying there and explain why. But Contact, to me, is an all-time top 10 favorite Dan Barrett movie. I adore this movie. What I love about it is this came out very much as, and I'm sure it was commissioned off the back of the X-Files. Okay, the X-Files in that early 90s period made ufology really cool. The scientific approach of the X-Files sort of opened the doorway to that. So as there were a whole bunch of X-Files knockoff movies and TV shows, they lent very much into the idea of alien abductions. You think about things like Fire in the Sky, based off a real UFO abduction, if you can believe in such ridiculous things. You've got things like that. You've got, there was that... Charlie Sheen filmed The Arrival, which came at a very similar time to Contact. And they were all just playing around with the idea of UFO abductions and conspiracies and the idea of, is there aliens amongst us? What was great about Contact coming out is that it looked at the idea of life away from this planet from a very scientific perspective, or at least from the perspective of scientists who are actual human beings. This was not really an exploration of outer space as much as interrogating what it means for somebody to have a lifelong quest, a ambition in life to discover something, only to find that when the door is open to it, they're not necessarily believed, and they are, for all of the progress that they've made, they're being subjugated to the background. And what does it mean to suddenly lose
Jodie Foster's performance makes it one of her best? Fine film.
Look, I just sort of think it's with any role, like you always think, I can't picture anybody else in this role. And that's always just a little bit silly because you haven't gone through a casting process or really sort of considered what else that role could be. But this is just one of those few times where I actually really can't picture anyone else in this role. There's a quality Jodie Foster has where it's a very sort of internal performance, but she's not really hiding it from you on camera. Like, it's surface while still being internalized. And that's kind of what this role absolutely needed. Playing that role of Dr. Ellie Arroway, I got my surname correct. It just sort of seemed as though this is a character who didn't really have any friends, doesn't have any family members who are alive, and that's a big plot point within the film. She just doesn't have anyone to lean on, and so she's got professional relationships around the place. And also even the romantic subplot of this is barely even romantic. It's kind of, she ends up having sex with the guy and just kind of latches onto him when he's in a room because she knows him. He's just the person who's in her life. It's not even necessarily a close relationship by any means.
Doesn't hurt that he looks like Matthew McConaughey, but it was a good on-screen pairing that brought him together. All right, okay, so we're going to lead with Contact for Dan's number one.
What? Just the last thing as well. Look, I mean, this obviously comes along as an actor who came out later in life as well. But just interesting that in any of her movies that I've sort of grown up watching when I was a kid to being into an adult, it's not like there was really any sort of sexuality as part of what we're seeing on screen. Like, it just sort of seems though that's locked off from what she's wanting to bring to the screen as an actor. And to me, that's kind of in part the strength of her.
With a small asterisk in that she did, or Hollywood did try to shoehorn her into some romantic roles that I actually think are very good filmed. And I'm most notably thinking of Summersby with Richard Gere. But
sorry, I was going to say, which films are you thinking of beyond Summersby? Because I can't think of any other film that falls into that category.
Well, yes, they're very good friends and they've made some films together, but they tried to do that to a certain extent with Maverick as well, with Mel Gibson and Jodie Foster. And that was more a fun, playful type of attraction, whereas Summersby was a steamy kind of down and dirty barnyard romance. So, I think she's still great in both films, but it was certainly at Hollywood's beckoning that they did that. So I'm going to jump in here very quickly with For me, being a little bit older, I still experienced her child performances when she was a child actor in things like all the Disney films she's made, particularly Freaky Friday, for which she's very well known. I remember seeing Freaky Friday at the movies in the George Street complex there. But there are two films from 1980 which are not really spoken of. One is called Carney, in which she takes a job with a traveling circus, and she's there opposite Gary Busey in one of his early crazy roles, and musician Robbie Robertson, the late Robbie Robertson, who did the soundtrack for Killers of the Flower Moon and was nominated for that. Carney's a very dark, strange performance, and a film and a dark performance from her, a very deliberate role for her to try to leave the Disney stuff behind. But also in 1980, she made this incredible film called Foxes. She plays one of four teenage girls who live in sort of the shopping malls and parking lots of Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley. It's about the lives they lead as they sort of come of age in this very adult lifestyle in all senses of the word. She stars opposite Cherry Curry, who was one of the runaways in that sort of punk girl group, and this has some really dark, heavy scenes, and it was the first film where we all sort of went, wow, Jodie Foster's growing up and she wants the audience to come along with her as she grows up. It came after Taxi Driver, so she'd already played the prostitute in that and made a huge impact in that film, but this was a very determined path she was taking into adult roles by taking young woman roles that were very challenging to both her and her audience. And Foxes, if you can see it, I guess it's on one of the streamers. It wasn't a box office hit, and it came just before teenage moviegoers took over the multiplexes, so it wasn't considered a big release at the time, but it now stands as this iconic sort of look at Los Angeles teenagers and one of her great performances. Have you ever seen Foxes or Carney? Carney is another film that's all but disappeared.
Look, I didn't even know Carney existed up until this very moment, to be completely honest. Yeah. Foxes I haven't seen, but I'm certainly very aware of Foxes.
Yeah. What's your second one? You want to go on with some more context?
Look,
or you got another one?
The second one, I was just going to sort of blend into the same thing. So, again, just sort of being of the age I am, in the 80s, Jodie Foster as a presence in those Disney movies were still fairly regular on TV. Like, they'd still play those with some regularity. Sure. So I saw a bunch of those movies. So that was very much there. But the thing that I probably have the greatest connection to from her early work from that age is she was the voice of Pugsley Addams in the Addams Family cartoons of the 1970s.
Yes, she was.
So I've seen so many hours of her as Pugsley Addams that I can never really quite separate that entirely from her overall career.
Yeah. This is all part of the vast tapestry that is Jodie Foster's Hollywood career. To sit down with her and talk about her growing up through this period may be tough, because it was child labor back then was generally abused, although she seems like a tough person with tough management at the time, so maybe she held her own course, but she'd have so much to tell about some of Hollywood's great names. So for me, the next film I'm going to look at is a 1976 film. This was another one that came off the back of Taxi Driver. It's called The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane. You can drop a quote in there. In A Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane, she plays a 13-year-old girl who lives with her who lives with her father. They befriend a teenage amateur magician, and she invites him in. But suddenly the father disappears, and then the nosy neighbor disappears. And we're trying to sort of judge, is this a mean little girl who's doing horrible things, or is she really the victim? And it's a really complex young actress's performance in a film that could have just sort of degenerated into creepy sort of door slamming suburban horror story. Jodie Foster does some amazing work in this as in a sort of late teens acting career.
Now, Simon, the last one I just want to talk about was, what was the name of that movie where she was a NPR-style reporter who used to go around just recording the streets, the audio of the streets?
That's a good one. There was one called The Brave One where she was...
I feel that might have been it.
Was attacked.
Yeah, it's like a revenge...
Yeah, it's called The Brave One. Not one of my favourite films of hers, but yes, strong.
Yeah, look, I don't think a great film, but when I think about that sort of later era Jodie Foster, like that's one of the roles that sort of really resonates. Just that image of her sort of walking around the streets of New York, and to me, that just seems like an ambitious failure as a movie. Like ultimately, that film could have gone down as one of the greats and been seen as a bit of a metatextual throwback to her sort of retreading sort of similar The Accused style ground. But yeah, the film just never, I think, worked entirely effectively. But I just always appreciated that film.
Yeah, I thought the politics was fairly ugly of it. There was a slew of films that came out of that time, An Eye for an Eye with Sally Field, and a little bit later, The Brave One with Jodie Foster, where they take the law into their own hands, Death Wish style, and they sort of had this patina of seriousness and highbrowness because Sally Field and Jodie Foster were in them, but they were kind of just sort of riffs on Death Wish. So there was an ugliness there that I didn't sort of dig.
I mean, thinking about them though, sort of mid to late 2000s, like this is post-Iraq war. It's very much about people having felt powerless politically for the last couple of years. Like you can kind of see where that sort of storytelling started coming from.
Oh, sure. Yeah, for sure. The last one for me, and we've mentioned it a couple of times, and we should point out we have sort of steered away from Silence of the Lambs because that clearly is a classic film and a classic performance in every way, but I thought we'd dig deep.
Are you going to talk about Elysium?
No, I'm not going to talk about Elysium. What was the one she made? Hotel, and it was this big all-star cast. Jeff Goldblum was in it playing a piano, and Hotel Terminus? No, it was something else. I can't remember what it's called. But it was strange.
Sure
We've mentioned a couple of times the one I'm going to mention as The Accused is my final choice. At that point, she wasn't Hollywood's biggest star, and she was taking on this role of a rape victim who, alongside Kelly McGillis, and we should point out that Kelly McGillis had top billing in this film, despite, she was a much bigger star coming off Top Gun and a couple of other films that Jodie Foster was considered sort of not the second tier actress in the cast, but not the big star. And when Jodie Foster went on to win the Oscar for this performance, featuring this hideous, horrible sequence on screen and play the woman who has to fight back first against the rapist and then against the system that almost protects the rapist, then it was an extraordinary performance. And I can remember sitting in Greater Union Cinema Parramatta watching it with a full crowd and just the silence in the cinema as the scene itself unfolded, and then the rousing sort of recovery that Jodie Foster has to go through in the film to come out the other end. So yeah, The Accused is a performance I'll never ever forget, along with so many other great. She's Hollywood royalty, and the fact that she's still doing amazing work in True Detective, Night Country is testament to that. Dan Barrett, we get to this segment we now called What Else Have You Been Watching? We've got 4 in this section, which could blow out. One of them could lead to a major argument. One of them I haven't seen. Let's see. Dan, what else have you been watching?
Okay, I assume the major argument is going to come to the new Peacock series Ted. This is a prequel series to the very popular and beloved movie Ted and the even more beloved movie Ted 2. Oh, gosh. Classics. Classics across the board. No, look, okay, so Ted was a minor box office smash, fairly low budget, did a couple of weeks of success out there. I don't think it's a film that culturally... Yeah, I don't think culturally it necessarily resonated that much. I think people thought it was fine and then got on with their lives. It just kind of came and went. But because the film did pretty well box office-wise, it gave them cover to go and do a second film, which I think just came and went. I don't think anyone really got along to see it in big numbers. But in the age that we're in, where Seth MacFarlane is still riding high off the success of the Family Guy animated series, and I guess maybe Ted, because all the rest of his big screen efforts have yielded terrible box office and terrible critic reviews and very little sort of cultural resonance. If you want to talk about Avatar having no cultural footprint, take a look at the works of Seth MacFarlane. But anyway... This is set in 1993. It's not the meeting of the guy that would become Mark Wahlberg. It's not like the meeting of him and Ted, but instead it's just a couple of years later when this guy is a teenager and getting involved in crazy antics with the bear. Oh, it's not good.
I hate Seth MacFarlane. I hate him like penis cancer. I don't want to see Ted. I don't know. Well, I get some idea why they're making this because it's IP they can regurgitate, but the thought of anything to do with Seth MacFarlane just irks me terribly.
Yeah, so look, this it's very sitcom-y, like it's not laugh track sort of sitcom-y, but it's basically this Ted movie, but in TV serialized form.
As
I guess
Blue? Like,
the two things
is it as Blue?
So two things to keep in mind with this one. So first of all is there's a sense of indulgence with this production that is very reminiscent. It's an echo of what was happening with The Orville, being Seth MacFarlane's Star Trek homage.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about The Orville, basically it's Seth MacFarlane thinking, hey, I'd like to star in a Star Trek TV show. Let me bring part of my irreverent sense of humor, but let's also just go to when Star Trek was good, which is 1994 with Star Trek Next Generation. And I could be the lead of Star Trek Next Generation. And because he had some clout, he made that happen. This kind of feels the same. It kind of feels as though it's sort of a half thought out idea. There's obviously an element of passion in this. He clearly has joy from telling stories about this bear and having that sort of cheeky sense of humor. Like, that's clearly what he's really into. And like, that's good. And you can feel that watching it as a viewer, but are you sharing in the fun? And I'm not sure that's necessarily ever the case. And you feel that here, like this is very much an opportunity for him with some of his preferred actors. Scott Grimes, who you've seen in a bunch of MacFarlane projects in the past, including the aforementioned Orville. He's here playing the father. And then there's other sort of bit players that sort of regularly sort of crop up through it. But then the other thing to sort of keep in mind with it is that this is a series set in 1993, but the politics and attitudes of a lot of the characters feel very much like it's just trying to be like, it's a 2024 TV program. There's a character in it who's the main guy's older cousin who lives in their house for whatever reason. She's concerned that they're not talking about little people when they're using the word midget, banning that around in the household. And so she's sort of schooling them on the language they're using. Then there's like other scenes where like he finds out that she sells pot to pay her way through college. It's American. And so like he's there at her apartment talking to like her housemate. And like the entire conversation just seemed like the modern contemporary conversations, but I don't understand why set it as a throwback if you're not necessarily going to engage in 1993. Instead, just do it as this head TV series where it's in 2024. Like, why not do that?
All right. So what we have here is the perfect segue as to why I didn't like The Holdovers.
Okay. Well, we'll segue and say in like 30 seconds.
Right.
I just kind of find it very interesting that this show is so preoccupied with being a conversation about woke politics and what's permissible while still being a prequel. You and I have argued about prequels in the past. I've got no time for them whatsoever. And a big reason is because it takes too much of the information you have on board as a modern viewer and tries to retroactively fit it into a narrative from a pre-established story. And when you start doing that, it just kind of corrupts everything that follows after it narratively. It never really fits. There's just no positives that come out of doing a prequel. And this is absolutely testament to a big problem with doing it.
Okay. All right, let's get to my views on The Holdovers. Now, I preface this by saying I totally understand I'm in the minority. It's at 94 or 96% or something like that on Rotten Tomatoes as we record this. Giamatti's just won the Golden Globe and is the whole film and all creatives involved with it is a heavy award season contender. So, yes. What I didn't like about the film, and I didn't like several elements of the film, but one of the key elements that I didn't like about the film is that this is a movie that's set at one of the most volatile points in American social history. It's set in 1970. At this point in time, the Vietnam War is raging. Campuses like the one featured in the film are going through enormous uprisings. It is the most volatile point in American history. You wouldn't know that from watching The Holdovers. This is a film that chooses to ignore the very era it wants to set itself in, just to create the illusion that this is a 1970s style film. When the film opens, and I mean really opens with an R rating credit, an R rating sort of title card on there, and Alexander Payne puts in film scratches and sound that makes it sound like it's running off film. It's all an illusion. I was immediately offside with that because it's a con. He's trying to invoke using elements that we recognize from 70s style films to give this movie some kind of cultural setting, some kind of importance with regard to the time it's set in, when in fact there's none. He just wants to make it look like a 70s film. The characters, I thought Giamatti was particularly grating, overacting to the extreme. He would essentially be unemployable in the manner in which he behaved in this time. And the young kid, who I thought was really good, in sort of a young Tom Hanks kind of way, the journey that they go on is so telegraphed and is so obviously destined for a certain point. This film wants to be a film from one of the most adventurous and exciting times, maybe the last great adventurous and exciting time in American filmmaking, and it doesn't want to take any risks. It is so diagrammatic and so structured in the way it tells its story. There wasn't a single surprise throughout it. Some cute dialogue and quick-witted dialogue and that sort of stuff is fine. Doesn't make it a smart movie, though, and I just think this was, while being entirely watchable, generally fairly forgettable.
Okay, so in big part, you and I are watching very different movies, is probably, and also you and everyone else in the world who all love this movie.
Doesn't make my opinion wrong. Doesn't make my opinion invalid.
It makes some of your opinions wrong. So, first of all, criticism of the time that it's set in. The film is a three-hander, effectively, with a bit more of an emphasis on the two male leads. But the third hander, the third stool leg cropping up the holdovers, is Divine Joy Randolph, who plays the character Mary. She is a woman who is dealing with the trauma of having lost her son in the Vietnam War. This speaks very much to the moment. It's this quiet... Sorry, there's another aspect which I think ties into this in a second, but it's a quiet sense of loss which dominates her life and will continue to dominate her life. Like, I don't think that there's another time in history where you could probably have a character who feels so insular dealing with a loss like this. I think that as soon as you hit the 1990s, if someone's been lost in the Gulf War or beyond, you've got, I guess, maybe a lot more support structures in place for people that have lost servicemen family members, but I think that she was left to her own devices emotionally and psychologically. I feel that is very much on display within this program. The fact that you were talking about, there was like all this political upheaval taking place, it wasn't on campuses like this. That was happening on university campuses. This is happening in an out-of-the-way high school environment, a boarding school for boys. There wasn't political upheaval taking place on this. These were kids who were just getting by, waiting to get to their very wealthy families. All the kids in this are 1%ers, Simon. Okay, there's no political upheaval coming from these guys.
That's stating that these kids didn't have any agency with what was going on in their country, that this was a totally removed. And that is
the total removal is the next part I wanted to get to, which was the reason why it needs to be set back here is because part of the plot line around this is about teenage boys who are stuck for the winter. Sorry, it's US, so it's Christmas time. Stuck in the middle of the winter, okay, at this house with nothing to do outside of the company of each other and the teacher, and also the woman that runs the food hall. Ultimately, if you set at any time later than that where they have access to, if it's the 80s, suddenly cable television probably starts playing a role in it. Suddenly you find all these other technological creeps that come into their lives. Ultimately, the earliest time you could set a story like this and actually have a sense of removal from the world for these characters is in that late 70s period. Like, that's the earliest you can do the story. So it makes all the sense in the world, the time that it's set in, and for this to be reflecting the politics of the time. The only time politics should creep in is really with that woman dealing with her loss, because the other people, this is a guy that only lives within that school. He never goes visiting the local town. He's got no interest. He's a man of books.
How does she ever deal with her loss in Alexander Payne's film? How does she ever deal with her loss other than through the prism of these two white guys? They don't even want to hear her grief.
That's a different conversation, Simon. If that's your argument, then I think that's fine.
There's that awful scene where she breaks down at the party and she's had a bit to drink.
Yep.
And her grief comes out. And as they're walking her back to the car, the two of them are only arguing about how they can best get out of that evening. That is the film's biggest problem in a nutshell. They've got this totally manipulative character played by Divine Joy Randolph, who is meant to represent the grief that America is showing for the lost sons of Vietnam, when in fact this film is not at all interested in exploring that grief or her grief.
Well, I don't think she's representative of America's grief. I think she's representative of her own grief. Okay,
it's
but
the only insight this film gives us into the most volatile point in American military history.
The thing with this movie, though, Simon,
provided.
Yeah, but the movie's not about Vietnam. It's about three very insular people who are all dealing with their own insular issues while being stuck together. Okay, it would actually be incredibly.
It would be of self-centered whining. This is a
yeah.
I just found it infuriating that this film should be about these not particularly interesting people with 1% problems at a time when so much more could have been said, both in 1970 and in 2023.
Well, I think you're just after us to be a different move than what this movie is actually interested in talking about. And that's not the movie's fault. That's you bringing additional stuff to the film.
Not at all. I'm not bringing anything to it. I'm bringing the fact that the film doesn't bring anything interesting to these characters.
Look, I think all three characters are actually exceptionally interesting characters, and I was very interested in their own internal turmoils and struggles. I think there's certainly complaints you can make about this movie. Something which you addressed when I was talking about Ted, which you haven't really quite followed up on, is the idea of bringing 2024 concerns to some of these characters' lives. I certainly think that there is plot elements, and I don't want to ruin it because I think it's one of the elements of the journey to go on with the film. But as you start learning a bit about the backstory of the two men, each of them have elements in their lives which speak very much to modern day concerns. I would certainly be happy to nod in agreement, saying that I don't know they necessarily approached that in a way that felt authentic to the time. And the rest of the spirit of the movie is the idea of, if this was set in the 70s, if they made this movie in the 70s, how would it look and feel? So it does betray that to a certain degree, and I think that's a fair enough complaint, but I just don't see any validity in the other complaints that you've made here.
All right, The Holdovers is in cinemas as we speak, doing very well by all accounts. People are raving about it.
Wait,
right,
Simon. Critically beloved, and audiences have really been responsive to it, but those audiences have been small in number. It has not been a successful movie for, I would suggest that maybe Alexander Payne is going to struggle a little bit to get that next movie made.
Okay. Dan, what else have you been watching? You alluded to a criminal record earlier in the podcast.
All I was going to say about this, when we were talking about True Detective and how fresh and vibrant it all felt, I look at Criminal Record, which this is a UK-based program. It was made for Apple TV Plus. It's so much of this feels like TV that we've seen before, and very much have done that. You've got two detectives, both at different life stages. One is much further into his career than the other young lady who's coming to it. The two actors being Peter Capaldi playing the older detective, and Kush Jumbo playing the younger detective who's sort of at the beginning of her career, even though Kush Jumbo is a woman who's, suddenly pushing 40 at the moment. So it felt like one of those weird things where she's slightly miscast by about 15 years, but, just go with it because of Kush Jumbo, and who doesn't love her? So you got these two people. She has been sort of a case has been dumped on her desk, which she's told just to sort of brush it away because it's not really that big a deal. It's a woman that's made a phone call late at night about her abusive boyfriend. She's concerned about her safety. She hasn't given her name. She hasn't really given enough detail, but she has said that there's a death that's taken place, that the accused murderer for it may not necessarily be guilty because her boyfriend has also taken credit for this and has some credibility. But anyway, she's very upset, sort of shouting out this phone, and like there's not enough detail, and they've looked into it. There's not really much there. But she goes a little bit further into it and approaches Peter Capaldi's character, who is responsible for investigating the convicted murder of this other case. And so that's kind of where the lines intersect. It's kind of a bit of a been there, done that, rote sort of storytelling going through a very sort of British-style murder mystery procedural. Okay, it's not like I've seen this exact story before, but I've certainly seen enough that's akin to it to kind of not be hugely excited by what's happening on screen. But what makes the series really work, and the reason why episode 1 finished up, and I just immediately went straight into episode 2, is you've got Peter Capaldi and Cush Jumbo. The two of them are such a compelling partnership on screen that even when they're in an antagonistic relationship with one another, like it's not like it's fireworks on screen, but gosh, it is it's a delicious dessert that you just want to tuck further and further into.
Like, we did the same. We watched two. I just very quickly. We watched 2 episodes like you did, straight into 1 and 2 last night. And I agree with you in that there's some fairly conventional beats in here. They use the thing like, "Hey, can I borrow your computer?" or "Hey, can you do me a favor?" So there's some of those traditional sort of tropish.
It's not even that sort of. It's not even that light work, Simon. It's just the entire structure and everything it's doing feels like we've seen this in every British procedural. There's nothing fresh about it.
But I do agree that those 2 characters, and especially the Weasley actor who's playing her commander, he looks like a troll. He's terrible. I mean, he's great in the part, but he's a terrible person, terrible character. Those 2 generate enough energy and sparks and tension with their characters to overcome the more conventional elements of this. So I'm on board for those 2 actors if I'm not entirely engaged with the broader sort of mystery that's going on.
Yeah, thematically, this is very much playing around with what I think is another well-worn sort of issue of this is a woman professional trying to be a woman professional in a world of men professionals that are getting her down. And it's just such a surface text engagement, as opposed to you look at what they're doing with this True Detective season, and it just kind of feels like it is so much smarter and knowing and is not really treating the audience like a simpleton in a way that this kind of does. There's a lot of really positive critical buzz around this, but all I just kept on seeing was just these tired, worn elements that I've seen before. Even from the name Criminal Record, like, come on, that is very beige. You look at the opening titles, it feel like heated up HBO titles from like 2013. Like, there's just nothing about this that just kind of really pops in the way that I wanted it to. But I'm still going to watch the whole thing purely on the relationship of these 2 leads.
Absolutely right. And what else have I been watching, Dan Barrett? Well, just very quickly, I stumbled across an old 1981, and that is old now, Sylvester Stallone Rutger Hauer film called Nighthawks, which was set in a crumbly New York. It's a kind of an international production in that Rutger Hauer plays a terrorist who has a point to be made, of which I can't remember what it was, but he was blowing up jewelry shops in London before he decided to come to New York City. Nigel Davenport plays the head of the British investigation agency who enlists Sylvester Stallone and Carl Weathers' New York cops to help him on the ground in New York City. And before you know it, Rutger Hauer is taking control of cable cars and throwing people out of that while Sylvester Stallone flies by in a helicopter. This is just an awesome bit of late 70s type of action darkness. There's a real sort of sense of this wants to be Serpico or Dog Day Afternoon, but we're just sort of heading into the 80s action boom as well. So there's a little bit of Die Hard in there as well, sort of prefaces those great action films of the 80s. It's just on the Foxtel in-house channel. It's a beautiful print. It's in widescreen. I hadn't seen this since the VHS scratchy rental copy days of like 30 odd years ago, so probably even more now. But watching it in this good condition at Rutger Hauer's just amazing. And it also features a rare big screen performance from Bionic Woman Lindsay Wagner, who is stunning, and a performance from the late Persis Kambata, who most Trekkies remember as the bald one from the first Star Trek movie, but who was actually a major model and actress from her native country of India, and this was one of her other American films. So get on to Nighthawks, check it out. Great action, great cast, all in their perfect physical prime, and a lot of good action as well. So that's on the Foxtel channel.
I'm concerned you didn't mention Billy D. Williams, but I'm going to let it slide.
Did I say Carl? I think I said Carl Weathers. I think it's Billy D. Williams.
It is Billy D.
Wasn't
Williams.
it Carl Weathers? Oh,
No, Billy D. Williams is in this.
Going to get emails about that. Screenwatchingpodcast@gmail.com. Dan Barrett, let's go to the history segment. This podcast is running wildly out of control. January 15, 1977, Happy Days debuts for the first of what will be how many seasons on the ABC network?
So what you don't know is I'm a Mad Keen Happy Days fan, and I can tell you this was 11 seasons, my friend.
You magnificent bastard. Look at you. That was exactly right. January 18, 2008, which Oscar-winning actor, whose latest film as a director is in theatres now, was named a UN Messenger of Peace.
So I'm not sure. My immediate assumption was Angelina Jolie, but she doesn't have a film in theatres now, so I'm not too sure.
Mr. George Clooney, who we mentioned earlier in the podcast, and whose film Boys in a Boat, or Boys in the Boat, is in theatres as we speak. Haven't seen it yet.
Is it in theatres?
Quite good. Yeah. Started January 1.
Really? Like in Australia?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to stop this podcast now. I'm off to see that.
January 20, 2006, which Disney Channel movie debuts, ultimately becoming the most successful of all time on the channel?
High School Musical.
Tuffy. Well done, sir. Well done. I could see the cogs twisting in your brain to get that answer. It's time for the birthday.
I find it interesting. Sorry, I'm looking at your notes here. You said that it was the most successful of all time on the streamer. But it's actually a channel, which
oh god,
well, you did in the.
I said I did change it in my question. Yes, look at you going to the running sheet when you need to. Okay, let's do the birthday quiz.
No, not happy birthday. No, not that. Please, no, not happy birthday.
Okay, this is a tough one. If you've seen the graphic for this on our Facebook page, I've actually put warning: toughest quiz ever. January 13, 1961, Julia Louis-Dreyfus. January 14, 1969, one Jason Bateman. January 17, 1962, Jim Carrey. And our man, January 18, 1955, the great Kevin Costner. Now, these have all worked with one particular major Hollywood player, and that's the connection. Can you put together those four faces and come up with one overarching Hollywood A-list type?
Okay, so I find it interesting you've referred to him as a major Hollywood player. If it was an actor, you probably would have said actor. If it was a director, you probably would have said director, which to me makes it think it's probably more like a producer, okay? Or at least has engaged with these people in different ways. So maybe you didn't say director because they may have worked with as an actor, although maybe they worked with them as an actor and not a director. And so working on that line of thinking, I first started burrowing into Jill Louis-Dreyfus because she just has fewer credits across the board. And so I started thinking about Rob Reiner. So Rob Reiner, being the producer of the Seinfeld series through Castle Rock Productions, and then also directed her in that movie North. Then leading that over, who else do we have? He directed Kevin Costner in, it was a mid-2000s film. I can't remember what it was. Oh, no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. May have been late 90s. It was, rumor has it, the Jennifer Aniston graduate follow-up thing. And then beyond that, so I'm pretty sure he did like some voice work on something Jim Carrey related, but I'm not sure what that is. Like I've got something vaguely in the back of my head seeing them like Carl Reiner and Rob Reiner doing something on a film together like that, but I don't know if it was a Jim Carrey film or not. And then there's also the Justine Bateman, the Jason Bateman of it all, and that's where I lose it a little bit. But this is kind of where my brain was at when I started thinking about it.
Points to you. You're absolutely on the right track. It's not Rob Reiner.
Okay, who we got?
You're absolutely right in that it's a major Hollywood player has been an actor, has been a director, has been a producer, and in that capacity, that's how he's worked with all these people. Let's go from Jim Carrey, starred in Ron Howard's The Grinch. Jason Bateman worked with Ron Howard on Arrested Development, of course. Now we get into the tougher parts of it. Julia Louis-Dreyfus's very first credit on IMDb as the girl who throws confetti in an episode of Happy Days. Her very first
she was also in Arrested Development, but go on.
And she was also in Arrested Development. And Kevin Costner, one of his first acting gig was as frat guy number 1 in Night Shift, directed by Ron Howard. So it was a tough bunch of celebrities to pull together this week. I didn't have a lot to work with, so it took a bit of deep diving, but there you go. That sums it all up.
Okay, well, I'm going to go looking for my Jason Bateman, Rob Reiner connection and see if I can make that stick.
It's got to be there. Bateman's been around for 100 years. I'm sure he's worked with Rob Reiner.
That's why I didn't start trying to think through Bateman because, even just like that period of like 1990 to 99, like, I think it had me there for like months.
Screen Watching, you can find us on Facebook at Screen Watching Podcast, Threads and YouTube at Screen Watching, or you can email us with all your opinions, screenwatchingpodcast@gmail.com. myscreen-space.net has got a bit of extra content up there this week, so have a look at that. Dan, where can we see your other workings?
Many places. I would recommend alwaysbewatching.com. That's where I do my daily newsletter. It's got TV news. It's got a little bit of movie streaming news. It's got some video game stuff at times. There's just a whole bunch of exciting stuff there on a regular basis. Like, how could you go anywhere else on the internet?
Why would you?
Yeah, it just seems baffling to me.
Thank you, buddy.
Thank you, Simon. We'll be back next week talking about more movies and TV shows. So many you can't even poke a stick at them. Folks, we'll be back then.